After 1824, after me comes the flood, the tyrant was still behind them, its towering figure moving slowly in the distance. Rain reminded herself that they could not waste any time, and yet she had no strength left to rise. However, that was all right. She had felt the same way the previous time she fell, and the time before that, and the time before that. Letting out a quiet groan, Rain sat up, then slowly staggered to her feet. Walking over to where she had dropped the hunting knife, she picked it up and sheathed her blades. The crude sheath she had made for the enchanted dagger was coming undone, sliced by its sharp blade. But it would hold for a day or two, which was more than she could ask for. Finally, she looked at Tamar. How are you doing?" The young legacy was laying down on the stretcher, breathing heavily. Her breathing did not sound good. "I'm all right, I heal fast. The bleeding is already stopping." Rain nodded. Even if the bleeding did not stop, there was little she could do. All she could do was trust in Tamar's incredible resilience. Walking over to where the alloy harness lay in the mud, Rain glanced at the corpses of the three nightmare creatures. Usually, she would have harvested meat and soul shards from them, but the tyrant was too close. There was no time. "I just need to hold on until nightfall. Then I can rest." She put the harness on and pulled the stretcher. She just had to keep walking and keep her essence flowing. Life had been complicated, but now it was very simple. The scope of her existence was narrowed down to these two things. She dragged Tamar away from the dead abominations. They continued their gruesome journey. As Rain walked, she could feel her soul changing subtly. There were countless radiant crystals at the heart of the whirlpool now, all being pressed together by the crushing pressure. She could feel the pressure growing. As it did, the rain was becoming more violent as well. It slowly grew from a constant downpour to a pelting deluge, as if the sky was slowly splitting open. The weather was strange. Tamar had mentioned once that it did not rain that often or that much in the southern reaches of the Moon River Plain. Her ancestral citadel was somewhere nearby, so she would know. It seemed that the world was either helping them or trying to kill them. Rain wasn't sure which and didn't care to find out. All she cared about was making it to nightfall alive. And in the end, she did. However, to her despair, the long-awaited reprieve did not come. Usually, she was able to create some distance between them and the tyrant by the time darkness fell. The abominable giant would lumber in the distance in the first half of the day, then slowly disappear beyond the horizon in the latter part. However, this time, she could still see its silhouette, following them from far away. Perhaps she had grown so weak that she couldn't maintain sufficient speed anymore, or perhaps the tyrant was slowly adapting to being blind. It was even possible that its eyes were gradually regenerating. Awakened abominations possessed stunning vitality, after all, just like awakened humans did. What seemed impossible for a mundane person was nothing special to them. In any case, the giant was too close. Soon, darkness enveloped the world. The three moons and the sea of stars were hidden behind the clouds, so it was even more oppressive than before. The rain fell in a constant stream, reducing the visibility even further. Rain lowered herself to the ground, kneeling in the mud. "Are we stopping?" Tamar couldn't hide the grim feeling of dread from her voice. Rain slowly shook her head. "We can't stop, not tonight." The tyrant was too close, so they had to keep going. She took a deep breath, feeling cold air cut her tortured lungs. Summon a luminous memory. They had avoided using one before, afraid that light would attract uninvited guests, but there wasn't much choice now. Soon a wave of stark light flowed from behind her, illuminating a narrow circle around them. The streams of water falling from the sky seemed to ignite with that light, glistening like precious gems. It was pretty. Rain sighed. Then she rose from the ground and continued walking. South, how far south had they gone already? When would they reach their goal? It did not matter. Rain continued to walk, arduously pulling the heavy stretcher behind her. She continued to spin her essence and listen to the tremors running through her soul. She had reached a state of being beyond exhausted. And yet, the worst part was that she couldn't see the tyrant anymore. It could have been far away or only a few hundred meters behind them. It could have even been reaching for them with its countless hands already. I need to keep going. And so she did. Slowly, all thoughts disappeared from her head. All that was left was the ringing of her soul, which was slowly growing louder and louder. Rain did not notice that the pelting rain was becoming heavier and heavier as well. A powerful wind rose, sending water flying almost parallel to the ground. Soon, a blinding flash illuminated the world, and a deafening thunderclap shook the heavens. The rain was turning into a furious storm. She smiled, feeling the streams of cold water wash the mud off her sunken face. Her smile was a little scary. Eventually, the lightning grew so frequent that there were almost no breaks between its flashes. The thunderclaps had fused into a continuous litany of deafening roars. If it had seemed as if the sky was splitting open before, then it was collapsing entirely now. A vast and prodigious storm had descended upon the Moon River plain. And yet, Rain wasn't aware. She could only think about walking forward one step at a time. But then, she couldn't walk forward anymore. Not because her strength had abandoned her, but because there was nowhere for her to go. Rain stopped, barely noticing that there was no ground in front of her. There was no mud, no stone outcroppings. Instead, she was standing in front of an abyssal drop. She frowned. Have I lost direction and swayed toward the canyon? But that was not it. Slowly, she grew cognizant of her surroundings. The thundering storm, the blinding flashes of lightning, the impenetrable darkness. And a deep, reverberating hum that seemed to penetrate her very bones, resounding from somewhere below. Rain looked into the abyss and staggered. She might have fallen over the edge if not for the harness that attached her to Tamar's stretcher. The young legacy called from behind, struggling to make her voice heard over the storm. Ronnie, is it? In front of them, the Moon River plain came to an end. The great plateau ceased abruptly, creating a vast and head-spinning wall of stone that stretched from east to west, as far as the eye could see. Countless canyons merged or opened into the vertical abyss, most of them expelling enormous jets of foaming water. The streams of water merged and plummeted down, creating an unimaginable, endless waterfall. It was as if the world was crying. The weeping goddess. They had reached the great waterfall that served as the boundary of the Moon River plain. The Lake of Tears was somewhere far below. The city governed by Clan Sorrow was situated on its shore, and their citadel was somewhere close, cut into the cliffs. Rain's eyes widened, not from joy but from horror. We're dead. Turning around, she waited for lightning to illuminate the world and saw the dreadful shape of the tyrant. The abomination was not too far away. There was no time to come up with a way to descend to the bottom of the towering cliffs. There was no time to explore the edge of the plateau, searching for the citadel of Clan Sorrow. The goal of their ghastly journey, which had been supposed to be their salvation, was nothing but a death sentence now. Because the tyrant was too close, pursuing them, and they had nowhere else to run. Chapter 1825, Edge of the Abyss. The storm shrouded everything in impenetrable darkness. The roaring thunderclaps reverberated across the plain, and a deluge of water was falling from the sky, as if the heavenly floodgates had shattered under the immense pressure, dooming the world to be drowned. Frequent bolts of lightning tore apart the darkness, replacing it with blinding light. And somewhere below, the tidal hum of the colossal waterfall was fusing with the raging song of the furious storm. Rain stood at the edge of the abyss, looking at the black sky with a resentful expression. Behind her, Tamar was looking back at the hideous shape of the pursuing tyrant. There was nowhere for them to run. Ronnie, the tyrant. Rain looked at the sky and then took a deep breath. Then, surrounded by the raging storm, she sat on the ground at the edge of the abyss. Crossing her legs, she placed her hands on her knees and closed her eyes. In a flash of lightning, her tranquil figure looked incredibly out of place. She exhaled slowly. Focus. Rain concentrated on her soul. A radiant river was flowing within her, forming a furious whirlpool. At its heart, beautiful crystals of essence were being tempered by the crushing pressure. The melodious song of her soul was louder than the storm and much more compelling. She couldn't hear Tamar anymore. Form, clash, awaken. Nothing else mattered. Behind her, Tamar looked at her mundane companion in despair. Noticing that Ronnie was sitting on the edge of the abyss, unmoving, she was stunned for a moment. Then a look of guilt and shame twisted her beautiful face. She assumed that the older girl had completely exhausted her strength, both physical and mental. It was already an incredibly valiant feat to have persisted for so long without collapsing. Ronnie possessed enough willpower and conviction, or maybe stubbornness, to put most awakened to shame. But everyone had a limit. Ronnie, Tamar gritted her teeth. Despite the terrible flood pouring from the shattered sky, the tyrant never seemed to lose their scent. It moved slowly, keeping its head low to the ground. Countless hands were supporting its weight, sinking deep into the mud. Rain was fully focused on her soul. Now that she did not have to walk or pull the heavy stretcher, the measure of control she could exert over her essence had increased. The radiant whirlpool spun even faster, and the pressure at the heart of it had increased even further. There were countless crystals of solid essence there, by now, each no larger than a grain of sand. They collided against each other chaotically, making her entire soul tremble. That trembling used to happen rarely, but now there was no stop to it. It was as if Rain's soul was in the middle of an earthquake, but it was not enough. Still, it wasn't fuse. Rain did not know whether her mental cry was a command, a request, or a desperate prayer. It was simply her will expressed in a single word. And just at that moment, either by coincidence or responding to her cry, two of the radiant gemstones collided. However, this time they were not repelled by each other. Instead, both cracked and then merged. A sense of indescribable jubilation drowned her heart. Finally, after the first pair, it was as if an invisible catalyst had been added to her soul, starting a chain reaction. More and more of the tiny essence crystals became covered by a net of fine cracks, and then seamlessly fused with each other. Then the larger gemstones consumed the smaller ones, or merged with those of the same size. The process was incredibly violent, resembling the catastrophic ignition of a thermonuclear bomb. The merging of the essence crystals reminded Rain of nuclear fusion, the wondrous process that kept the distant stars burning in the cold, empty sky. And it was indeed as if a star was being born at the center of her soul. There was blinding light produced by the fusing gemstones. There was heat as well. The very heart of her soul had turned into an incandescent, luminous sea, and she couldn't sense individual crystals anymore. The whirlpool of essence was being slowly absorbed into that radiant sea. The soul core is forming. Indeed, hidden in the sea of light, a soul core was being built within her soul, and that nascent core was like a bridge between her soul and her flesh. Rain felt as though a miniature star was burning in the center of her chest. Waves of heat were radiating from it, slowly reaching her empty stomach and lacerated shoulders, then her tortured arms and legs, then her aching hands and feet. Under that heat, her bones, muscles, organs, and blood vessels were being rebuilt and revitalized. She was being reborn. She was becoming stronger, faster, healthier. It was euphoric. With each second, her transformation was becoming more profound. After some time had passed, the star burning in her chest finally cooled down. The luminous sea dimmed, and from it, a radiant sphere was revealed, shining beautifully upon Rain's soul. The heat was replaced with a soothing coldness. That coldness washed over her body, taking away all the aches and discomforts that had been accumulated there over the past 6 days. Then it moved up, reaching her mind and soothing it. She slowly opened her eyes. Is this what it means to be awakened? Rain felt powerful. Her body was suffused with ferocious strength, startling endurance, and boundless vitality. Her senses were sharper. Even her mind seemed to have become more profound somehow. Soul essence flowed freely through her body, seeping into her bones and muscles. It felt richer and more responsive, almost palpable. The soul core was at the heart of it all, serving as the bridge between tangible and intangible. A tired smile appeared on Rain's face. I did it. Lost in the depths of a furious storm, sitting on the edge of a bottomless abyss, surrounded by darkness, and pursued by a harrowing abomination. The first human of the waking world had just awakened without taking upon the curse of the nightmare spell. Chapter 1826. Coming storm. While Rain was in the middle of her awakening, Tamar was struggling not to drown. Streams of water were pouring from the sky, mixing with mud. Laying powerlessly on the stretcher, she felt weak and spent. The situation seemed to be hopeless. Not only would she die, but Ronnie, who had refused to abandon her and strived so stubbornly to save them, would be killed too. Looking at the furious black sky, Tamar wanted to give up, but she couldn't. A long sigh escaped from her lips. Then a whirlwind of sparks surrounded her, forming into a beautiful spear. Tamar gritted her teeth, then rose to her feet, using the spear as a crutch. Immediately, severe pain pierced her fragile legs. It had been 6 or 7 days since they were broken. The bones had healed somewhat, but even for an awakened, that was not nearly enough time to recover. She was probably undoing all that healing, but still. Tamar refused to die lying down. Better yet, she didn't want to die at all. She was also indignant at the thought of Ronnie dying because of her, so she had a hard decision to make. I have to summon the Echo. The monstrous wolf was protecting the survey team, and she was unwilling to compromise their safety. However, at this point, there was no sense in keeping the Echo with them. That was because it would disappear if Tamar died, leaving the survey team similarly defenseless. The problem was that there was no way to guarantee that summoning the Echo would save them. It was an ascended monster, a protector gifted to her by her clan. An ascended monster was a powerful creature, but it was not a given that it would be able to defeat an awakened tyrant. Especially this tyrant in particular, who seemed both ancient and exceedingly powerful. The wolf wouldn't be able to carry them away either, because the tyrant was too close, and the Echo would instantly attract its attention. So, in order to increase their chances, Tamar would have to assist the Echo in fighting the tyrant herself. She could still draw her bow, even if doing so would make her wounds open. I'll summon it then. And yet she hesitated. Watching the tyrant slowly draw closer, Tamar waited for something. Maybe something would happen, some miracle that would lead the hideous giant away. Maybe a bolt of lightning would descend from the sky and burn it. Maybe she wouldn't need to fail her friends and mission after all, but nothing happened. The tyrant was already too close. It was still following their scent. A miracle did not descend, and their fates were still sealed. Tamar took a deep breath and prepared to dismiss the Echo. But just before she did, a hand suddenly landed on her shoulder. Tamar flinched and looked back. Ronnie was standing there, looking at her calmly. Constant flashes of lightning were reflecting in her striking black eyes, making it seem as though they were illuminated by inner light. The mundane girl looked different somehow. Tamar couldn't tell what about her had changed exactly in the lightning-infused darkness. Ronnie smiled. "It's all right, I'll take care of it now." She paused for a moment and then added calmly, "Summon that sword of yours." Tamar looked at her in confusion, failing to understand what was happening. Her reason told her that Ronnie must have lost her mind and that there was no point in listening to her ramblings. But somehow, Tamar did not believe it. She felt a strange compulsion to be unreasonable and believe in her companion, and after a long pause she did. Instead of dismissing the Echo and summoning it here, she summoned her brutish Zweihander and offered it to Ronnie. Ronnie took it with a thankful nod. She could barely lift it before, but now she was holding it easily, as if her strength was suddenly in no way inferior to Tamar's own. Patting Tamar on the shoulder reassuringly, Ronnie turned and walked away from the edge. She was heading toward the approaching tyrant. Rain walked through the storm, carrying the heavy greatsword easily. Sadly, she had not had a lot of time to bask in the ecstasy of having awakened they were still in mortal danger. The tyrant was still drawing closer, and she had to kill it, which was a tall task. Even now that Rain was an awakened, the tyrant posed a lethal threat to her. After all, most awakened did not fight such powerful creatures alone. Her case was especially precarious because she was a singular existence. Not only had she awakened mere minutes ago, but she also did not possess an aspect yet. Unlike the carriers of the nightmare spell, those who awakened naturally like her had to spend time slowly discovering their aspect and flaw. Before that happened, she would not have powerful aspect abilities to assist her in battle. All she had was her enhanced physical prowess, cunning, and Tamar's sword. Now she would see if that was enough. Reaching a certain point, directly in the path of the approaching tyrant, Rain lowered the Zweihander to the ground, assumed a stance and froze. She had thought a lot about how to kill that damned tyrant. Actually, it wasn't that hard to achieve. The creature did not possess an impenetrable carapace or thick fur to stop her blade. Its defense was mostly in the form of overwhelming offense. The forest of arms were its minions, so damaging or destroying them would not harm the abomination. One had to reach its body to deliver a fatal wound, but to do that they had to fight their way through the avalanche of monstrous hands, which was close to impossible for someone like her. However, the tyrant was blind now, so that was what Rain decided to gamble her life on. Standing motionlessly in the path of the abomination, she did not make a single sound. In fact, she even held her breath and forced her heartbeat to slow down in the middle of the roaring storm. The creature would not hear it. At least that was Rain's hope. As she watched the hideous nightmare creature approach, all her instincts were screaming for her to turn away and run. However, she did not move at all. Soon, the tyrant drew so close that she could discern every ghastly detail of its gaunt body, flooded by the light of the flashing bolts of lightning. The creature was coming right at her, but it was not aware that its prey was so close yet. Soon, a monstrous hand landed in the mud directly to Rain's right. Then another landed in the mud to her left. The abomination dragged itself closer. Its appalling, oversized head was now almost above her, the enormous maw close enough to swallow her whole in an instant. Rain smiled darkly. Got you. Instead of fighting her way through the forest of hands, she had allowed the blind tyrant to bring itself to her. She finally moved. As soon as she did, the tyrant's head jerked, turning toward her. But it was already too late. The Zweihander exploded forward, slicing through the mud and rising in an upward arc. Rain pulled with one hand and pushed with the other, using its long handle as a lever. Her awakened strength was great enough to make the blade of the greatsword turn into a blur. A split second later, the Zweihander struck the tyrant's chin. Its sharp blade carried enough force and momentum to slice its jaw in half, sever its tongue, break through the fragile bones of the nasal cavity, cut cleanly through its brain, and finally escape from its forehead. In an instant, the abomination's head was split in two halves. A moment later, Rain was already jumping back. She easily leaped a dozen meters back, then slid in the mud the same distance. By then, countless hands were already pummeling the spot where she had stood. If she had been even a little bit slower, she would have been crushed, but it did not matter, because those hands were nothing but minions. The tyrant itself was dead. Its body swayed heavily and then collapsed into the mud, a river of blood spilling from its mangled head. Just like that, the pursuit was over. Chapter 1827, Cleansing Hidden in the Shadows. Sunny let out a secretive sigh of relief. The past week had been a terrible ordeal for Rain, but it had not been easy for him, either. A long time ago, Sunny had told Rain that he could teach her how to wield a sword, how to traverse the dream realm, and how to kill her enemies, but he could not teach her how to be strong. The world was a cold and ruthless place, and his little sister was much too soft to endure its cruelty. Even now, all these years later, she retained that softness. She had learned how to wield weapons, survive in the wild, and hunt down abominations, but her nature was still the same. Rain had never suffered heartbreaking loss, had never felt the lightless depths of true despair, and had never faced the darkest sides of humanity. Despite her cool appearance and tough reputation, at her core, she was still the same kind and sweet girl, which was a solace to Sunny. He never wanted her to lose that part of herself, and yet he couldn't coddle her too much either. It would only do Rain harm if she learned to rely on him too much. So he had laboriously created the persona of Shadow, her mercurial teacher who was both friendly and caring, but also a little sinister and not completely reliable. That way, she could still feel a false sense of danger while being protected by him from the shadows, and grow stronger for it. It would have been fine to let Rain awaken at her own pace, but the war was too close. So, Sunny had used the chance encounter with the awakened tyrant to design a trial for her. His own version of the first nightmare. The irony of how similar it was to his personal first nightmare had not escaped him. A punishing escape through the wild reaches of the dream realm, in the company of an awakened swordsman, pursued by a blind tyrant, of course. There were differences, as well. And although Rain had never been in real danger due to him observing her from the shadows, she definitely had not felt that way. Her struggle had been real, her suffering had been real, and her eventual triumph was real. Sunny, meanwhile, had not struggled himself. All he had done was eliminate any fallen abominations that could have stumbled onto the two escaping girls and keep an eye on the survey team to make sure that they made it back to the main camp all right. And yet, he felt completely exhausted. Watching Rain suffer was not easy for him. He wouldn't go as far as to say that it had been harder than it had been for Rain, but still. Sunny felt like his heart was bleeding, and that was saying much, considering how difficult it was for him to bleed. Similarly, while Rain felt incredible joy and pride at being able to awaken, his heart was full of emotion as well. However, for Sunny, he felt even more. That was because he could see more and understood more. Rain had a deep connection to her soul, for a mundane person, and could control her essence well. But Sunny perceived it on a much deeper level. That was why he could see a tiny bead of hideous darkness that nestled in his sister's soul. A seed of corruption, the nightmare seed. Every mundane person who had entered the dream realm carried one within them, just like those infected by the nightmare spell in the waking world did. Although Sunny was not entirely sure which came first, the seed of nightmare or the infection. Perhaps it was precisely because some people carried hideous darkness within their souls that the spell chose them. In any case, the seed in Rain's soul had not grown in the past 4 years, and would not bloom into a category, one nightmare gate, unless certain conditions were met. That was because it was small and minuscule enough to be suppressed by the authority of Queen Song. As long as Rain remained in the Song domain, her first nightmare would never come. But it would also make her an eternal hostage of a domain unless she accepted the spell and challenged the nightmare. While the storm was raging and Rain was going through the final stage of her awakening, Sunny observed her soul in somber silence. The numerous sparks of light, the crystals of solidified essence, fused under the pressure. A luminous sea ignited at the depths of Rain's soul. Forged in the heat of that sea, her soul core slowly came to shape, and at the same time, unnoticed, the bead of darkness dissolved in the light, destroyed by it. Sunny had seen a seed of corruption bloom in the soul of a sleeper once. Watching the opposite process take place was both poignant and miraculous. Is that the purpose of the first nightmare? To push the infected into awakening and thus destroy the seed, preventing corruption from blooming. Awakening was the first step toward divinity, after all, and divinity was in direct opposition to corruption. So, it only made sense that coming closer to divinity would render one immune to the weaker manifestation of its enemy. That was the second way Sunny knew of for a soul to be cleansed of corruption. The first way was known to everyone, but very few ever considered it as such. It was death. Awakened were used to collecting soul shards from the nightmare creatures, but they rarely questioned why was it that the remnant fragments of corrupted souls were pure and untainted. What happened at the moment of death that purified them? Or was it death itself that eliminated the hideous darkness? Now that Sunny knew more about the world, the void, and the origin of death, he understood that death was a weapon to destroy corruption. And that was what it did. He observed the tyrant's tainted soul collapse and be cleansed as well. The moment the abomination lost its life, the vile darkness shrouding its soul withered and died. In the end, only 5 radiant shards were left, so Sunny let out a relieved sigh. Finally, the ordeal was over. Rain's grisly trial was finished, and the broader threat to her life was not as pressing anymore either. Now that her soul had been cleansed, Sunny would be able to take her out of the Song domain. He had many more options now. Of course, it wasn't certain that she would want to leave. Remaining in the shadows, Sunny glanced at her. At the moment, Rain was stumbling back to where Tamar was leaning on her spear with a pained expression on her face. He followed stealthily. This next part is going to be tricky. Chapter 1828, Lost and Found. Rain made her way back to where Tamar was leaning on the spear, put the sword down, and sprawled tiredly in the mud. Now that the tyrant was dead, the rush of power she had felt because of the awakening receded. Her body might have been tempered and reforged, but it was still depleted and weary. Her mind, too, she was dead tired. Some distance away, the abomination's corpse was laying on the ground like a small hill of flesh. The creature was dead, but its minions weren't. The monstrous hands were still moving, searching for the killer in blind fury. Luckily, they remained attached to the tyrant's corpse, so their reach was limited. Until the corpse decomposed and fell apart, nothing would reach Rain and Tamar. The movements of the terrible hands were a little panicked. Looking at the sky, Rain let out a long sigh. The storm was slowly dissipating. The wind had already grown weaker, and the rain was not as heavy anymore. The lightning did not strike as often. The roaring thunderclaps were not as loud, as if growing distant. She could even see gaps in the veil of dark storm clouds. Unexpectedly, rays of pale sunlight were pouring from through the gaps, which meant that it was the 7th day of their journey. Rain stared at the rays of sunshine with displeasure. How annoying! She had hoped that it was still the 6th night, just to avoid the nightmare spell's favorite number. Rain had a mild aversion to the number 7, purely out of obstinance. Tamar finally let go of her spear and fell back on her stretcher. The younger girl looked at her for a long time, her eyes full of questions. But in the end, her exhaustion won, and she simply closed them. Not long after, both Rain and Tamar were asleep, laying next to each other in the mud. This was the first time in a long while they slept peacefully. By the time Rain woke up, the sky had cleared. Strangely enough, she didn't feel groggy or exhausted. Her body did not ache all over either. Instead, it was brimming with energy and vitality. The low hum of the weeping goddess enveloped the world like a lullaby. She stared at the clear sky for a few moments in confusion. Oh, right, I'm an awakened now. Sitting up, Rain glanced in the direction of the dead tyrant. The forest of arms was still moving, but none of them had escaped the corpse yet. That was a relief. Looking away, she raised her own hands and studied them. Her skin had become smooth like silk. Her nails were like jade. Turning her hands, she stared at her palms intently. Her calluses were gone. Huh! Rain blinked a couple of times. Her hands looked soft and delicate, as if she had never done any hard labor at all. It was a bit stupid, but she couldn't help letting a small smile creep up on her face. "Wait a minute." Rain pulled off her dirty, tattered shirt and unclasped the military bodysuit. Peeling it off to reveal her fair torso, she opened her eyes wide. The mark left by the blow that the huntsman had dealt her was gone. A few other scars she had collected in the last few years were nowhere to be seen, either. Her skin was supple and unblemished, nearly flawless. "Wow, ah!" While Rain was delighting in the sight of her ladylike body, a hoarse voice resounded from behind her. "What are you doing?" She flinched and hurriedly pulled the bodysuit close, embarrassed at being caught doing something so unserious. Turning around, she saw Tamar looking at her with a complicated expression. "Right." Rain smiled sheepishly. "In nothing. I was just good morning, Tamar." The young legacy remained silent for a while, maintaining her usual stern frown. She glanced at the sky, which was already being painted golden and scarlet by the setting sun, but did not comment on how wrong Rain's greeting was. Eventually, she opened her mouth and asked hesitantly, "Have you been and awakened all along, Ronnie?" Now that the deed had been done, Rain honestly wasn't sure how to deal with the situation. There had been no choice but to act when the tyrant was about to catch them. But how was she supposed to explain its death to the young legacy? She wasn't even done processing what had happened herself. Rain met Tamar's gaze and shook her head slowly. "I think you know that I wasn't. If I was, I wouldn't have put myself through all that torment." There was hesitation in the younger girl's eyes. She knew that Rain could not have been an awakened, and yet there was no other logical explanation. Reality and reason were clashing in her mind, leaving her in a state of loss and confusion. After a while, she said stiffly, "Unless you have some kind of powerful flaw that limits when and how you can express your power, that is possible." Rain wavered for a while, then sighed. "No, I have no such flaw. I wasn't hiding my rank from anyone." Tamar gritted her teeth. "Then how were you able to wield my sword? How were you able to slay the tyrant? It doesn't make any sense. It's impossible for a mundane person to do." Rain scratched the back of her head, remained silent for a few moments, and then shrugged. "You are right. A mundane person would not have been able to wield your sword well, maybe some huge guy." Tamar took a deep breath. "Then how?" Rain looked at her and smiled easily. "Isn't it obvious? When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So, I wasn't awakened before, but I am now." She raised an arm and flexed her muscles. "It really feels amazing, by the way." The young legacy stared at her with a stunned expression. "No, you couldn't have conquered the first nightmare. There was no time. You couldn't have even challenged it within the Queen's domain." Rain nodded. "You are right. I did not conquer the first nightmare." Tamar took a deep breath. "How could you awaken then?" Now was probably the last chance for Rain to keep her mouth shut. But really, did she have to? She had a vague hope that Tamar would not betray her. More than that, she did not think that keeping her achievement secret was the right thing to do. Since Rain had found a way to awaken without becoming a carrier of the nightmare spell, others would be able to follow her example, as well, perhaps not many, but some. Which meant that fewer children would have to die while challenging the nightmare, like her older brother had. Many would still choose to accept the spell without a doubt, due to all the boons it offered. But at least they would have a choice. Conversely, if she kept her accomplishment hidden, then in the future, the deaths of every unwilling sleeper would indirectly be her fault. Rain wasn't sure how or when she wanted to share her knowledge, but she knew that it had to be shared. So she gathered her courage and said, "How did the ancient people of the dream realm awaken? You should know that there was no nightmare spell back then." Tamar's eyes widened slowly. She reeled back, mumbling softly, Before the nightmare spell, impossible. The knowledge has been lost." Rain smiled. "Yes, the knowledge has been lost, but now it has been found. I found it. With a lot of help from my teacher." Chapter 1829. A new way before the sun set, the minions of the dead tyrant accepted the death of their ruler. Rain watched with a dark expression as the countless hands stopped moving for a while, and then started to claw at the flesh of the dead abomination. The corpse was going to come undone much sooner than she had expected, allowing the monstrous hands to prowl freely. She wanted to be as far away from the swarm of them as possible when that happened. Soon, she was pulling Tamar's stretcher through the mud once again. It had been torturously hard and exhausting before, but now, Rain did not feel any strain at all. It was so easy that the bitterness of her past efforts seemed like a joke. She was slowly coming to terms with the fact that she had become an awakened, smiling brightly from time to time. Tamar was slowly coming to terms with it, too. The young legacy spoke from the stretcher. "But how exactly did you do it?" Rain considered if she should break into a sprint, but then decided against it. "Well, it is hard to explain with words. The first thing you should know is that natural awakening works in reversed order from the one induced by the spell. You must learn how to sense and control your essence first and form the soul core later." She remembered her early days in Ravenheart. Back then, she had barely known her teacher. Your essence has to awaken first. There are a few ways to make that happen, but the only one I know of is to absorb the essence of awakened creatures. Tamar shifted quietly on the stretcher. Soul shards used to be extremely precious in the waking world, so very few mundanes ever had a chance to acquire many of them before. The situation is even more dire now. With how many new awakened and masters are out there, everyone is striving to saturate their cores. She paused for a moment and then added scornfully, "You must be very rich, Ronnie, to have acquired so many, for a simple porter." Rain grinned. "Who, me? No, I'm a bit poor, actually. I never once managed to buy a soul shard. I just went out there and hunted down nightmare creatures one at a time, mostly dormant and a few awakened." The young legacy let out a long, exasperated sigh. "You crazy mundane girl," Rain chuckled. "Well, anyway. Then you have to learn how to sense and control your essence. That part is the hardest. I don't really know how to describe it since there are no words in human language to do something like that. Plus, it's a bit of an impossible task to begin with. How do you describe the sense of balance? How do you describe colors to a blind person? It's like that. Well, you should know I am sure you, awakened, struggle all the time to explain various things to mundane people. I mean, we awakened." She paused for a few moments, then continued calmly. "The last part is to form the soul core. That is what I have been doing ever since we've met. The process is rather simple, if a bit tedious. You just need to control your essence and make it flow in a circle like a whirlpool. If you do it long enough and well enough, your essence will start to solidify. And then, at some point, a chain reaction will start, birthing the core. That is how you become awakened, and that is what happened to me yesterday." Tamar remained silent for a while. Eventually she asked, "That doesn't really make sense. You couldn't have learned all of this on your own. Someone extraordinary must have guided you. But that is not even the issue. All right, I'll accept that you are a mundane girl who habitually hunts down nightmare creatures. That much is theoretically possible, at least. But it would also mean that you should have stayed comfortably in a well-defended city during the last and most sensitive part of your awakening. There was no reason for you to work as a laborer in a road construction crew, even without taking into account that such a job would slow down the process of refining a soul core. It is simply beneath someone of your ability." Rain coughed awkwardly. Now that she had decided to share the truth with Tamar, how much, exactly, was she supposed to share? She couldn't reveal the identity of her teacher, because that was not her secret to share. As for the rest, she hesitated for a moment. "To tell you the truth, I got myself into some trouble in Ravenheart, so I was advised to disappear from the city for a while," Tamar scoffed. "I'm not surprised." She remained silent for a while, then asked in a serious tone, "One thing that I can't understand, Ronnie, is why you have decided to share your secret with me." Rain stopped and turned around, looking at the young legacy with a hint of dark amusement in her eyes. "Well, The cat was out of the bag after I killed that tyrant. So I had two choices, either tell you the truth or toss you over the edge of the waterfall. Although, I might still choose the latter." She stared at Tamar for a moment, then turned around and exploded with laughter. "Gods, the expression on your face. Relax, it was a joke. Plus, why would I keep it a secret? I want as many people as possible to know. That way, fewer kids will be dying in the first nightmare. Fewer of them will be sent into a literal death zone on the winter solstice like you were, too." Rain couldn't help but be giddy. The intoxicating feeling of strength and potency permeating her body, the pride and relief of having finally accomplished the goal she had been pursuing for so many years, the promise of a gentler future that she could potentially help usher in, it was enough to make her head spin. While she was basking in joy, Tamar's cold voice resounded from behind. "Ronnie, you are a bit naive, aren't you?" Rain glanced at her in confusion. "What's that about?" Laying on the stretcher, the young legacy looked at the sky tiredly and let out a long sigh. "You absolutely cannot tell anyone about how you awakened, at least not while you are so weak and lack protection. If you knew what's good for you, you really should have tossed me over the edge of the waterfall." Rain blinked a couple of times. "What? Why?" The younger girl shifted and looked up at her, her gaze somber. "Just think about it. The entire power hierarchy of our world is built around the nightmare spell. The entire economy, too, more or less. Those who wield power can do so because they control the resources people need to survive. Awakened warriors are one such resource, perhaps the most important one. Now, you possess something that can render all that authority meaningless. What do you think will happen to you when those in power learn about your existence?" Chapter 1830, Resistance to Change. Rain stopped, feeling her sense of joy dim a little. A perplexed smile appeared on her face. She wasn't a fool, so she had considered these things as well. But didn't the importance of her discovery far outweigh such details? "But it can save countless lives." Tamar looked away and shrugged. "Can it? Maybe in the short term, but what will happen when these new and untested awaken have to face the horrors of the dream realm? What can cowards who refuse to face even the first nightmare do? Surely they will buckle and break, leaving humanity defenseless." "In that sense, what you offer is poison, not salvation," she sighed. "That is not my opinion, by the way. That is just one example of what others will say to justify harming you and suppressing your discovery. They might not even do it out of malice, but out of sincere belief. Because what you offer does not just attack their authority, but also their identity. That, as well, is built around the nightmare spell for many." Rain dropped the harness into the mud. "You can't be serious." Her voice was calm, but her eyes weren't. Because she could easily imagine a world where Tamar was right. Take the two domains, for example. On the surface, the royal clans were benefactors to those hundreds of millions of mundane people who now lived in the dream realm. But if one looked at it differently, the citizens of the domains were hostage to the royal clans. They could only be safe if their sovereign protected them, and could only really attempt the first nightmare, and thus step on the path to greater power, if the sovereign or one of the sovereign's vassals allowed them to. In the future, when more and more people of the waking world settled in the dream realm, that would become the cornerstone of the authority of the royal clans. Would they be willing to share that authority? And then there were the legacy clans below the two royal houses, whose culture and identity were irrevocably connected to the dreadful challenges of the nightmare spell. They were already prohibiting their scions from saving themselves from the trial of the winter solstice by entering the dream realm in advance, purely out of belief that warriors had to be forged in fire. Would they accept awakened who had not faced the first nightmare? Or would they find the very concept offensive? The consequences of Rain's achievement went far deeper than she had considered. Tamar sighed. "I am deadly serious, Ronnie. You should speak to the extraordinary person who guided you to awakening, at least, before making any decisions. They had to have been more aware of the repercussions than you are. Be mindful, though. Make sure that they have your best interest in heart before listening to what they have to say." She paused for a moment and then added in a subdued tone, "Until you do, no one must know that you are not a carrier of the nightmare spell. We will tell them that we had no choice but to cross the realm boundary and leave the Song domain while escaping from the tyrant, and that you had your first nightmare as a result. That will work as a temporary measure, at least." Rain looked at her soberly. Tamar was young, but she was a member of a legacy clan as well. She served the queen as a vassal. So she was the exact type of person she had warned Rain against. Can I trust her? After what they had experienced together, Rain wanted to believe that she could, but in a sense, covering the truth would mean betraying the trust of Tamar's clan and Queen Song. Would she really do that? Rain sighed. "One thing I don't understand, Lady Tamar, is why are you willing to hide this secret for me?" The young legacy looked at her from the muddy stretcher. Her face was pale and stern, which was a bit of a comical look for such a young woman. After a while she looked away, remained silent for a moment, and said stiffly, "Well, aren't you a member of my survey team? I am responsible for your well-being as a superior. So if something happens to you, a stain would be left on my reputation, and I value my reputation very much." Rain stared at her silently, keeping a straight face. Adorable. By that time, the night had already fallen, and the 3 moons were high in the sky. So she couldn't see Tamar's expression very well. She did see something else, however. With a sigh, Rain unsheathed her hunting knife. Moonlight glistened on the sharp blade as she bent down. Tamar seemed to flinch when she saw the knife. What are you doing?" Rain cut the harness, separating it from the stretcher, and looked at the young legacy with a neutral expression. "I'm sorry, Lady Tamar. I'm afraid you'll have to go over the edge after all." Tamar's eyes widened. What?" Rain stared at her for a few moments, then laughed and pointed in the direction of the edge. "You might not see it from the ground, but actually, out there in the darkness, far below, a scattering of lights was shining faintly through the water vapor. It was the city built by Tamar's clan on the shores of the Lake of Tears." Rain stood up and started dismantling the harness. "The plan was to reach your clan's citadel, but I don't really know how to cross all the canyons that stand in our way. It would be much easier to climb down from the plateau and reach the city. So summon the brightest luminous memory you have. We're going down." Tamar was looking up at her with a frozen expression. After a while she scowled in outrage. "Ronnie, was that supposed to be funny?" Rain shrugged. "I don't know. I thought it was pretty funny." Soon they left the stretcher behind. Tamar was strapped to Rain's back with the rearranged harness, holding onto her shoulders with trembling hands. Before, Rain would have never dared to climb a slick, sheer slope while carrying such a heavy burden, but now that she was an awakened, nothing seemed impossible for her anymore. With the bright light of the luminous memory illuminating the vertical surface of the weathered stone, she carefully started the descent. Her physical strength seemed inexhaustible, so all she had to do was pay attention and keep in mind how far from the wall her center of gravity was. That said, the Moon River Plateau was terribly high, so reaching the Lake of Tears was taking an eternity. The weeping goddess flowed down on both sides of them, but the stretch of the slope Rain had chosen was relatively dry. At some point, she sensed Tamar's tension and started talking to calm the younger girl down. Rain talked about all the things she was looking forward to after awakening, like not having to do laundry or carry a heavy backpack while climbing mountains. Mainly these 2 things. And having soft hands. "That is what you were worried about." Tamar's voice sounded incredulous. Rain grinned. "Listen, Princess Tamar, you might not know it, but humble laborers like me take skincare very seriously." The young legacy remained silent for a while, then sighed in embarrassment. "No, actually, I get it. Girls from legacy clans all secretly look forward to becoming awakened. We train really hard, so by 16, your hands are a nightmare in and of itself." Rain laughed. It was already dawn by the time they reached the water. Rain had been worried that she would have to swim to shore, but there was no need. Tamar's luminous memory was very visible in the dark night, so the inhabitants of the city had long noticed a strange spark slowly crawling down the sheer cliffs. So there were boats waiting in a semicircle around the base of the cliffs, with armed awakened on them. Now their dreadful journey was truly over. Chapter 1830. One abstract concept. Dressed in a comfortable nightgown, Rain was sitting on a bed. The bed was wide and soft. The sheets were immaculately clean and crisp, a far cry from the cold cradle of mud she had been sleeping on for many days. It was also much nicer than her own bed in Ravenheart, so she had nothing to complain about. The room itself was spacious, but austere. The citadel of Clan Sorrow was cut into the cliffside, so the walls surrounding her were that of rough stone. The furniture, however, was quite elegant and beautifully made. There was a single arched window in the room, opening to the pale lilac expanse of the evening sky. The roaring of the weeping goddess seemed quiet here somehow, but also constant, like a persistent hum. The air was fresh and smelled of water. The peaceful, but uniquely austere mood of the somber citadel helped Rain imagine easily where Tamar's overly serious demeanor had come from. She sighed. Things had happened fast after the two of them reached the Lake of Tears. First, Rain and Tamar were brought to the city built on its shore. It was much smaller than Ravenheart, but still lively. The architecture style was distinctly different as well, favoring flat roofs that served as gardens as opposed to the capital, where most roofs were slanted and covered by tiles to avoid snow and ash accumulating on them. They did not spend much time in the city, though. The Saint of Sorrow was currently away, but Tamar's mother was there. After receiving news of her daughter showing up severely wounded, she immediately sent retainers to retrieve her. Rain and Tamar were taken to the citadel, which was cut directly into the vertical side of the great waterfall and oversaw the city from high above. Tamar was treated by an ascended healer. Rain, meanwhile, was welcomed as a guest of Clan Sorrow. She met the matriarch of the clan as well as a few elders. Everyone had treated her graciously, from the awakened retainers and mundane citizens to the members of the direct family. Tamar had briefly shared the story of how the two of them had ended up in such a sorry state, including the fake version of Rain's awakening. Everything seemed fine, and yet Rain was in a heavy mood. That was because she had heard a lot and inferred even more from the conversations with the locals. The war seemed imminent. Some of the people she had talked to were aware of it, while some were not. Nevertheless, everyone was alarmed and uneasy, as if there was invisible tension permeating the air. Many things had happened after the survey team left the construction camp and lost contact with the rest of humanity. The conflict between the two great clans had grown much more dire. Valor continued to demand that Silent Stalker and Master Dar of Maharana clan were handed over, and Song continued to refuse. There were all kinds of unrest on the streets of Bastion and Ravenheart, NQSC, even. There had been protests and violent clashes between the followers of the opposing domains. A large crowd was chanting threateningly in front of Clan Song's compound in the waking world. Someone had tossed makeshift incendiaries at the fortress walls surrounding the location of the king's dream gate in the northern quadrant. A few young legacies had already fought openly, devastating a public venue. They were arrested by the agents of the government, but the government itself was behaving strangely, as if frozen by fear, indecision, and internal conflict. And those were only the outward signs. The more dire omen was how deserted the citadel of Clan Sorrow seemed. There were awakened warriors, but too few of them. There were members of the direct family, but only the less powerful ones. Which told Rain one thing: the Queen was secretly mobilizing her forces. The road Rain had helped build was almost complete, and soon legions of the Song domain would march on it, heading to Godgrave. The war, which was an abstract concept before, was almost palpable now. It was much sooner than she had expected. And so Rain was sitting quietly on the bed, watching as the sky turned dark beyond the window. Finally, when all sunlight was gone and deep shadows devoured the room, a familiar presence emerged from them. Her teacher leaned on a wall and applauded quietly. His smile was as carefree as it had always been. "Congratulations, you are an awakened now." Rain looked at his dark silhouette sternly. "Where the hell have you been?" He gave her a vague shrug. "Oh, you know, here and there, hiding in the shadows, taking a beach vacation, sitting idly on my dark throne. Why didn't you do well without me?" Rain lingered for a few moments, then let out a heavy sigh. "I wouldn't call it well exactly, but sure, actually I did fine." He grinned. "Fine. You are the first human of your world to have awakened without that pesky thing, what do you call it? Oh, the nightmare spell. Great job, Rain, you really made me proud." She silently extended her hand and opened her palm. "Give it then." He raised an eyebrow, or at least she thought he did, since she couldn't see his face clearly. "What?" Rain frowned. "My memory. You promised me a memory after I killed the huntsman." Her teacher laughed quietly. "Right. Don't worry, I will. I'll even throw in one more for that awakened tyrant, and a third one as a free bonus for a return customer." He hesitated for a moment and then added more sincerely, "But really good job, awakening, killing the tyrant, and not leaving that girl to die too. I'm not sure that I would have done the same as a sleeper." Rain looked away, feeling a little embarrassed. "Thank you. Anyway, I was never really a sleeper. That would have been embarrassing. I'm way too old to be one." After that, neither of them spoke for a while. Eventually, Rain asked, "So what now?" Chapter 1832, The Other Side. Her teacher sighed. "That is up to you. Now that you have awakened, we have more options. You are not a prisoner of the song domain anymore, so if you want, I can take you to safety to wait out this entire mess." She faced him, not saying anything. He chuckled. "What? I have nice places to take my student to as well, you know." Rain smiled faintly. "Says the man who has lived in my shadow for 4 years. The joke was just like countless others she had told in the past, but today it did not land. She didn't feel it. Rain shook her head. "You know, I wanted to awaken because I wanted to be strong. Have I become strong to do nothing then? Running away and hiding in a safe place sure sounds nice on the surface. But do you really think that I would want to?" Her teacher sighed. "No, not really." He hesitated. "So what do you want to do?" Rain remained silent for a long while. "Tamar told me to consult the person who had guided me to awakening before trying to do anything. So what, was she right? Will I be silenced if I try to share my knowledge with the world?" He walked over to the window and looked outside, his silhouette almost indistinguishable from the shadows. "Well, that kid has some sense. What she tried to tell you was a bit too dramatic and extreme, but fundamentally she is right. Of course, there are ways to go about it. You won't be able to offer this knowledge to the world freely, but the sovereigns will not discard it either. After all, it is another tool they can use. So, as long as you are willing to let them use it as they see fit, and are ready to accept that it will only ever be used sparingly, I can arrange that." He turned around and smiled. "Alternatively, you can entrust it to me. Your friend said that this knowledge should not be shared while you are weak and lack backing. However, she is wrong about one thing. You do not lack backing, Rain, since you have me. I might not be capable enough to stand against the sovereigns just yet, but I am more than capable enough to disseminate information without being caught by them." Rain frowned. "What would be the point, though? You might be able to avoid them, but people who receive the knowledge from you won't be. So the royal clans will just suppress them instead of me. Even if they fail to uproot the knowledge entirely, there will be countless victims. That is not what I want." Her teacher grinned. "Smart girl. Well, actually, that is all beside the point. In truth, you don't really need to hide that knowledge for long." She raised an eyebrow, confused. "I don't," he nodded. "I'd say by the end of this war, all your concerns will become moot, or well, we'll have bigger problems to solve at the very least. So keep your secret safe until the war is over. Who knows, the situation might change entirely by then. His voice grew a little lighter. In the meantime, work on becoming a master. Maybe find a way to manifest a flaw in an aspect. Right now that you have a soul core, we will have to teach you how to enter your soul sea. Rain listened to him with a smile. At some point she said, "Teacher." He paused. "What?" Rain remained silent for a moment, then said quietly, "I am going to participate in the war." For the first time in a long while, he seemed a little rattled. "What kind of have you lost your mind?" She shook her head slowly. "No. Actually, I've been thinking about it for a long time," Rain sighed. "Tamar said that I am naive, and I know you think that way too, but I am not. Yes, I tend to assume the best of people, even if some of them don't deserve it, but I am not a fool." He blinked a couple of times. Assuming the best of people who don't deserve it is pretty much the definition of being naive. She looked at her soft hands, illuminated gently by the moonlight. "In any case, the Sword Domain is going to declare war on the Song Domain. If the King of Swords wins, then an occupation will follow. I can't just sit on the sidelines and watch without doing anything." He pursed his lips. "What, do you think that the Queen is any better? Valor might end up being the ones who initiate the war, but make no mistake. Clan Song wants it just as badly. More than that, what will change if one sovereign replaces the other? Isn't it all the same for the simple people who live in the Song Domain? Not to mention that you don't belong to that domain to begin with. You are from a government family." Rain looked at him somberly. "A government family? Sure, I am. But teacher, for how much longer will the government exist? Once there is only one royal clan instead of two, do you really think that they will allow an independent power to remain without submitting to their rule? Neutrality will become a myth by then. And anyone who did not join the right side in the war will be branded as a sinner. That includes government families like mine." He lingered for a moment. "I'm not sure about how much longevity the government has left, but you are right. The winner will certainly consolidate their power." She shook her head. "And yes, it matters which sovereign rules the Song Domain. The royal clans might seem the same to you, but do you really think that the King of Swords, who is synonymous with Bastion, will treat Ravenheart the same as his ancestral home? That he won't siphon resources from the conquered lands to feed the central regions? More than that, by the end of the war, many people would have died. Citizens of the losing domain will be occupied by the people who have killed their brothers, sisters, parents, and children on the battlefield. It won't be a peaceful process." Her teacher sighed. "Well, you are right. The King of Swords might certainly do something like that, and there will be some tension and therefore some measures of suppression." Rain smiled bitterly. "And lastly, I do believe that both sides want the war. But teacher, the people I know are in the Song Domain. Tamar and her clan, the porters from the survey team, the road manager who went out of his way to help me make more money while staying safe, the merchants who used to buy the materials I harvested, our neighbors in Ravenheart who brought us food when we arrived from NQSC, young awakened guards who welcomed me back from the hunts, and so many more. They are all good people. These are the people I know, and they are the ones who will suffer if the Song Domain falls to the army of Clan Valor. So," she looked away, "I can't claim any sort of moral superiority by choosing to fight for the Queen, but I can't step back and do nothing either." Rain took a deep breath and looked at her teacher resolutely. "So I'll do what I can, little as it may be." He stared at her for a long time, not saying anything. Before she could see a hint of his expression, but now his face was entirely shrouded in darkness. Rain suddenly felt nervous. She had never seriously angered her teacher before. Did she do it now? Eventually, though, he let out a long sigh and said in a grumpy voice, "You're not making my job easier, you know that. Bah, what a troublesome student." Her teacher shook his head in dejection. "But I sort of expected that to happen," he cursed. "What can I say? I guess we are joining the army of Clan Song. Why the hell not? One side, two sides, three sides at this point, what's the difference?" Chapter 1833 Honesty is the best policy. Days before, Sonny had been left alone on a peaceful beach. He just stood there motionlessly for a while, holding Neff's dress awkwardly and not knowing what to do with it. Was he supposed to just leave it here, or return it? What would that scene even look like? Simply imagining it was a little terrifying. Here, your dress. You left it behind the last time. His face slowly turned a beautiful shade of pink. Eventually, Sonny sighed, folded the dress gently, and put it down. He put his own clothes back on, summoned the nebulous mantle, then briefly rinsed the dirty plates in the river and placed it all back into the picnic basket. He placed the blanket there as well, and finally put the folded dress on top of it. By then the velvet sky was illuminated by a scattering of bright stars, and the world was bathed in moonlight. He pushed the boat into the water and jumped inside. Rowing it upstream was not as effortless as it had been to drift downstream, not to mention that he was all alone now. His side felt chilly. Moving the oars and looking at the moon, Sonny let out another sigh. Well, it had to be done. He considered just using Shadow Step to return to Bastion, but then abandoned that idea. After all, that aspect ability belonged to the Lord of Shadows, not to Master Sunless, and although he had told Nephi's the truth, these two were entirely different people as far as the rest of the world was concerned. Sonny wasn't quite sure how much longer Master Sunless would be able to exist, and what role the humble shopkeeper would play, but he still wanted to remain cautious. It was not time to abandon that persona yet. Hopefully, such a time would never come. Listening to the soothing sounds of the river, he slowly savored the memories of today. Seeing Nephi's descend from the sky like a celestial fairy, witnessing her easy smile at the docks, rowing the boat side by side with her, pressed tightly against each other, listening to her laugh as she dove into the water, sunlight reflecting from the surface of the river as she splashed him, standing near the shore in her tantalizing bathing suit. And the rest? Maybe I could have handled it better. He probably could have, but she had caught him by surprise with her somewhat believable but entirely mistaken theory of who Master Sunless really was. Remembering Neff's subtly smug expression, Sonny couldn't help but laugh quietly. What will I do with her? In any case, he had got his point across. He confessed his secret identity, made sure to explain that deceiving her had not been his intention, and expressed the sincerity of his feelings. The rest was up to Nephi's. And speaking of Nephi's, Sonny hesitated for a few moments and then asked silently, "Cassie, are you listening?" There was a stretch of silence, and then her calm voice resounded in his mind. "I am." Sonny froze, then cleared his throat in embarrassment. "Come to think of it, I sort of threw Cassie under the bus, didn't? Well, better not mention it, ever." Sonny pretended not to remember doing anything of the sort and asked, "I assume you witnessed everything." She didn't deny it. "I did, for what it's worth." "I think you did a good job. It was the right decision." Sonny exhaled slowly. "I hope it was." But, however, before he could finish the sentence, Cassie suddenly interrupted him, which was a bit strange since it was not at all like her. "Oh," Sonny raised an eyebrow. "What's the matter?" There was a long stretch of silence, and then Cassie spoke again, her voice sounding a little strange. Oh my." Sonny frowned. "Is something wrong?" This time her response came almost immediately. "No, of course not. I just sorry, can't speak right now." With that, Cassie's voice grew silent and she did not respond again. Sonny continued to row the boat upstream in bewilderment. After a while, thinking about something, he winced. I hope she survives." Far away, on a tranquil heavenly island, an ivory pagoda seemed to shimmer with reflected moonlight. On one of its higher levels, a delicate young woman was sitting behind the desk, tracing her fingers across a parchment. Her lovely face was enchantingly beautiful, and her long hair was like a cascade of pale gold. At that moment, the young woman turned her head to the white stone of the chamber's outer wall. Her expression changed slightly. Oh! In the next moment, something crashed into the island with a resounding boom. Cassie slowly rose from behind her desk. Oh my! Then she walked out from behind the desk and faced the door. Her movements were poised and elegant, but also seemed a little nervous for some reason. She frowned slightly. I'm sure it'll be fine." Sunny's voice resounded in her mind. "Is something wrong?" Cassie hesitated for a moment. "No, of course not." But then the door flew open with a bang and a tall figure appeared on the threshold, clad in an intricate suit of enchanted armor. Cassie gulped. "Neff, when did you get Ba?" Nephis was already inside, the door slamming shut behind her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her face was flushed, and her usually calm eyes were full of scathing intensity. Cassie lingered for a moment. "Tell you what?" Neff was approaching her with wide strides. Her office, sadly, wasn't that large. "Don't give me that. I know that you saw everything. Everything." Cassie made her best effort to flutter her eyelashes innocently. Unfortunately, her eyes were hidden behind a blindfold, so it had no effect. She tilted her head in a flawless imitation of a confused lack of understanding and said, "How could I have seen anything? I'm blind." Her tone was soft and elegant. To illustrate her argument, she pointed at the blindfold. Instead of answering, Neff lunged at her. Cassie made her best effort to hold in a frightened squeal and evaded the grab with a graceful step. It wasn't that hard to do, since her awakened ability warned her of danger in advance. Luckily, Nephis was not using her full Titanic speed. Otherwise, Cassie might not have been able to escape even with the forewarning. "And now wait a minute, Neff, I can explain." "Sure you can." "Stop dodging and come here then. I'll let you explain." I'd rather not." Too late. Something crashed loudly inside the office. "No, but when did you get so slippery?" "I'm not slippery, I'm adroit and graceful." "Oh yes, you are for now." "Wait." There was another loud crash. Stop breaking my furniture." "I'll buy you a new desk." "That's not the point." "Come here, or I'll buy you a new shelf too." Firekeepers who had gathered on the lower level of the ivory tower in frightful silence looked at each other. Eventually, one of them said, "We didn't hear anything, right?" Another nodded. "Of course. In fact, I am currently asleep in my cabin on the chain breaker. I was never even here. I am actually in the waking world right now. I think my flaw made me deaf." There were a few moments of silence. "Let's just go before she decides to buy a new door too." With that, they quietly dispersed. Chapter 1834. As simple as that. Sometime later, Cassie's office was a mess. The actual damage wasn't that severe, but there were parchments and sheets of paper scattered everywhere. The two young women were sitting on the floor, breathing heavily. Cassie's blindfold was a little crooked. Nephis glared at her for a while, then groaned and hid her face between her knees. Eventually, her muffled voice resounded in the stone chamber. I forgot to retrieve my damned dress." Hearing that, Cassie livened up a little, as if feeling a chance to redeem herself. "Oh, don't worry," he picked it up. Instead of answering, Nephis slowly raised her hands and silently grabbed her head. After a few moments of silence, she said, "When is the war starting? Let's go to war, Cass." The blind seer smiled. "Of course, I'll go with you." She paused for a moment, then added softly, "But honestly, I don't know why you are reacting so strongly." Nephis raised her head and looked at the other young woman in astonishment. "Why, I'm embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed that I want to fall through the earth." Cassie smiled slightly. "Really? Well, embarrassed is better than angry, I think." She paused for a moment, then asked cautiously, "Are you disappointed?" Nephis remained silent for a while, then sighed and leaned tiredly on the wall. "No, yes, maybe." She gritted her teeth. "I am disappointed, but I am also excited. I don't know." She hesitated for a while. "I liked many things about Master Sunless, and some of those things were how soft and safe he was, unlike me and everything around me. I'm sad that these qualities of him were a deception." Nephis frowned. "But then they weren't really. The man I've come to know and like is not an illusion. It's just that I've only been exposed to a part of him. That part is still real, though it's so confusing." Her voice grew a little heated. "And then there is his other part. The Lord of Shadows. He is someone I appreciate. Someone whom I might have wondered about what would it be like if he stood by my side. That was a nice thought. She leaned her head on the wall. So do I think that I lost something, or did I unexpectedly gain the best of the both worlds, or is it both? I'm confused. Then Nephi's hid her face in her knees again and let out another groan. But that is not even what matters. Cassie, who had been listening to her tirade silently, raised an eyebrow. There were very few people in the world that Nephi's felt comfortable with enough to let herself be so open and frank. In fact, there was probably no one except for Cassie, so she did not want to interrupt. But now she had to. It's not what matters then. Nephi's raised her head and glared at her silently. After a while, she opened her mouth and said, It's just is not how it was supposed to be. Cassie touched her hair awkwardly. How was it supposed to be? Nephi's let out a heavy sigh. I just thought that I will spend some time with Master Sunless and try to enjoy myself. Maybe something would come out of it and maybe not. In any case, it was supposed to be a timed entanglement. Soon enough, before anything too serious might have happened, I would have left Bastion and gone to war. And then, by the time it was over, a year or several years later, I would have been able to decide what to do then. She looked at Cassie intently. Do you see the problem here, Cass? There is no then anymore. Because even if I leave Bastion, he'll still be with me. Cassie pretended to study her expression. She wished dearly to be able to see Neff's face right now, but she couldn't. It was just the two of them in the room, so she could only see herself. Eventually, Cassie chuckled lightly. I see. She took a deep breath and lingered for a while. Actually, I knew that Master Sunless and the Lord of Shadows were the same person for a while now. I trusted that he had no ill intentions toward you, and he asked me to keep his secret until he found an opportunity to tell you himself. That was why I kept quiet. But honestly, I wanted you to enjoy yourself as well. I knew that you would go into the changing star of the immortal flame mode as soon as you learned that he was a powerful saint. You tend to forget that you are a human too, Neff, and humans need repose sometimes. Cassie paused, the light smile disappearing from her lips. There were some other reasons as well, but there is no point in talking about it. In any case, he promised me that he would tell you before the war, and now he did. So that secret is in the open. Cassie remained silent for a while and then sighed. So you need to make a decision now. Nephi's looked at her somberly. Eventually she asked in a quiet tone, But how do I decide what to do? You know that I am not good with these things, feelings, bonds, and distractions. Cassie couldn't help but laugh. Yes, I know the fact that you used the word distractions is proof enough. But actually it is very simple. I'll help you make the right decision. Nephi's looked at her with subtle hope. Cassie spoke softly. Follow my lead. Close your eyes. Now imagine meeting Master Sunless tomorrow and telling him that whatever there is between you two cannot continue and you are ending it immediately. That you will be nothing but colleagues in the future, fighting side by side as allies, and nothing more. Nephi's followed her advice. Cassie could not see, but she felt her friend's shoulder slump a little. She smiled. How does it feel? Nephi's remained silent for a while. Eventually she said with a hint of reluctance in her voice, Terrible, Cassie sighed in satisfaction. Then don't do that. Instead, do the opposite. There, it's as simple as that. Nephi's opened her eyes and looked at the blind seer silently. Her expression must have been a little startled. Cassie shrugged with a smile. Feelings, bonds, and distractions are not that complicated. Haven't you been studying passions recently? Just follow your passion and things will work out. Even if they don't, you won't regret making the effort. The only thing you'll regret is never giving it your best. Nephi's blinked a couple of times, staring at her strangely. Cassie frowned. What? Her friend shook her head. No, nothing. It's just that, how are you so good at this? You've never had a boyfriend either. Cassie faced her with an expression of horror. What do you mean, never had a boyfriend? I was very popular in school, you know. Nephi's raised an eyebrow. Sure, but did you have a boyfriend? Cassie opened her mouth. That's beside the point. And by the way, when are you going to buy me a new desk? Nephi's rose to her feet, patted down her armor, and headed for the door. No, really, I need a desk. Neff paused at the threshold, looked back for a moment, and said before disappearing in a subtly rushed manner, I mean, you are in charge of finances. Put a request for a new desk on my behalf. Anyway, see you later. I think I know what to do now. A moment later, her receding voice resounded from the corridor. Good night. Chapter 1835. Next morning, Sonny reached Bastion in the dead of night. He tied the boat to the pier, climbed ashore, and walked slowly in the direction of the brilliant emporium. There was a lot on his mind, so he was not in a hurry to get home. Eventually, though, he did. The marvelous mimic opened its door unprompted to welcome him back. It even retracted the terrifying fangs, which were usually out at night, back inside the door frame. Sonny patted the lintel, walked into the dining hall absent-mindedly, placed the picnic basket on a table, and sighed. He was a bit tired, but doubted that he would be able to sleep tonight. And indeed, Sonny wasn't able to douse the flames blazing in his mind for a long time. He tossed and turned in the bed, only falling asleep shortly before dawn. As a result, he overslept, only waking up from the sounds of Aiko entering the shop. Since his petite assistant had showed up for work, the morning crowd wasn't far behind, either. Sonny sat up and rubbed his face, then went about washing up for the long day ahead. Will she come? He figured that Nephi's would need a long time to sort her feelings out, but still put extra effort into making himself look presentable on the off chance that she would not. Aiko's voice resounded from downstairs while he was in the middle of his routine. Hey, boss, what should I do with the basket? Sonny swept his wet hair back and responded casually. There are some dirty dishes inside. Give them a rinse. He washed them in the river yesterday, but everything still needed to be cleaned properly. Sonny continued to get himself ready. There were no mirrors inside the mimic, so he used the gloomy shadow to look at himself instead. Needless to say, the shadow was not amused by having to stare at his mug first thing in the morning. Or ever, really. That guy never changes. It was then that Sonny froze, opened his eyes wide, then dashed down while summoning the nebulous mantle. No, Aiko, wait. But it was too late. The petite girl was standing in the kitchen, the picnic basket floating in the air by her side. It was open, and Aiko was holding a beautiful white dress in her hands. Sonny grew still. She looked at him with wide eyes and asked in a small voice. Boss, why did you bring a girl's dress back from your picnic? Sonny stammered. It's not what you think. I didn't do anything. She just ran off without her dress. It happened that way. Aiko stared at the dress silently. Then a small frown appeared on her face. Wait a minute, these measurements. In the next moment she was standing next to Sonny, poking him in the chest with a finger. That is Changing Star's dress. You debaucherous scoundrel, what did you do to Nephi's? Sonny softened the onyx shell, afraid that Aiko would bruise her finger, and pretended to reel back from her jabs. I didn't do anything. We were just escaping the heat in the river. And what do you mean, scoundrel? Weren't you the one who encouraged me to strike while the iron was hot? When did I ever? Ouch, I don't remember, but you definitely did. It was then that the silver bell hanging above the door rang, and they both froze. Someone was standing at the entrance, looking at them calmly. Tasteful white clothes, beautiful figure, lustrous silver hair. Sonny's heart skipped a beat. It was Nephi's. She lowered her gaze and looked at the dress which Aiko was still holding in her hand. Nephi's smiled politely. Oh. I've been looking for that. Walking into the kitchen, she took it from the petite girl's hand and looked at Sonny with sparkling eyes. Thank you for picking it up, Master Sunless. He inhaled slowly. Why yes, sure. Why was she acting so nonchalant? What was she thinking? Did she come here to condemn me or to embrace me? He gulped and asked cautiously. I hope everything is fine after what happened yesterday. Nephi's nodded curtly. It's fine. Then she frowned a bit and mumbled quietly. No, actually, now that I think about it. After what happened last night, I'll need to replace some furniture. Sonny flinched. What? At the same time, Aiko's eyes widened even more. What? Nephi's looked at them in confusion. "Oh, sorry, I was just talking to myself." She paused for a moment, noticing their expressions, and then added hesitantly, did I say something wrong again?" Eventually, Sunny managed to leave the stunned Aiko behind and lead Nephi's to somewhere more private. And now that they were there, he was silently cursing himself. "No, but am I an idiot? Why didn't I go downstairs to the memory shop? Why did I bring her upstairs instead?" Currently, they were in his bedroom. While Sunny was berating himself, Nephi's looked around with curiosity. "Is that where you sleep? This version of you, I mean." Sunny forced out a smile. "Ah, yes. At least one incarnation of me has to, from time to time. The others don't sleep, but since I am supposed to be the most human one, I do." He silently evaluated his bedroom and thanked the dead gods for the habit of always making his bed first thing in the morning. The room was clean and cozy, with a beautiful view of the mirror lake beyond the window. The castle was bathed in the golden light of dawn, and there, above it, the ivory island was shrouded by clouds. Nephi stared at his bed for a few moments, as if trying to remember something, then turned away and looked out of the window. A hint of a smile appeared on her lips. "I think I can see my window from here." Sunny would lie if he said that he had not spent plenty of time staring at the distant silhouette of the ivory tower, so he kept silent. Instead, he gestured to a few items decorating his room. "These are some curios that I collected in the dream realm over the years. They are nothing much. But exploring the past is one of my hobbies." Nephi studied them for a while, then turned to face him and said simply, "I know." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "You know?" She hesitated for a few moments. "The exploration report on the tomb of Ariel written by nobody. You are nobody, aren't you?" Chapter 1836, Resolution. He was startled by that question. It had come out of nowhere, completely crushing his expectations of what she wanted to talk about. Both the best and the worst of them. Sunny remained silent until the pain of the flaw made it difficult, and then nodded slowly, choosing not to say anything else. The more he said, the higher were the chances of her asking him something that he was unable to answer. Nephi sighed, then explained calmly, "I started to suspect it after meeting the Lord of Shadows for the first time. You were too strong to have come out of nowhere. A saint as powerful as that simply had to have left a mark on the world. And when I asked who had taught you my family's swordsmanship, you answered that nobody had. I did not note it initially, but later something seemed to click in my mind." She paused for a few moments, took a deep breath, and then spoke. "The memories of everyone who had entered the third nightmare with me are affected. We don't really know every detail of what happened there, but there in Godgrave I guessed something." Nephi's paused before adding, "The tomb of Ariel, you were." However, before she could form the question, Sunny interrupted her by raising his hand. There was a complicated expression on his face. Inside, he was full of intense happiness at the thought of Nephi's knowing that they had challenged the third nightmare together. It was not exactly the same as remembering him, but it was something, at least. Something infinitely more meaningful than the nothingness of his current situation. But he also knew that she would not be able to remember his answer. And unlike Cassie, who was able to retain the memory of having forgotten something due to her aspect, Nephi's would not be able to do even that. So instead of confessing the truth, Sunny said quietly, "Before you say anything else, I must confess something. There are certain things that my flaw prevents me from sharing. So please, some words are better left unsaid." Nephi studied him intently for a while, then let out a heavy sigh. "I see. I think I understand." She turned away and smiled faintly. "That explains it, why Cassie put so much trust in you, and why her condition has improved so suddenly." Sunny turned away quietly. He had misled her with his warning, but it seemed that his deception had led her to the right conclusions at least. Nephi's looked at the distant ivory island again. "I won't say that I am not disappointed, but if this is how it is, I won't ask then." Her back was very straight. After a while, Sunny heard her even voice again. I will ask you something else, though, Sunless. He took a deep breath, suddenly feeling nervous. This was the moment of truth. How ironic. What? Nephi's turned around and smiled. Her voice was calm and even. I'm leaving Bastion in 7 days, so will you take me on another date in Godgrave? Sunny looked at her breathlessly. Suddenly bashful, Nephi's glanced down. I know that it is not the most romantic location, but he interrupted her again. Breaking into a smile, Sunny nodded. Yes, I will. I'll be delighted to. He paused for a moment and then added, in fact, I have no choice but to follow you to Godgrave Nephi's. She hesitantly raised her eyebrow. You don't, chuckling, Sunny nodded. Of course. He took a step forward and offered her his hand. After all, I am still contractually obligated to forge that sword for you. How can I leave your side before it's finished? She smiled, and took it, and that was it. Their strange, tentative relationship had not ended despite the many secrets they were keeping, the heavy burden of the forgotten past, and the dark shadow of the imminent war. It was going to continue tenaciously despite the uncertain future, which made both of them happy. Sunny, at least, felt incredible joy. It was both strange and wonderful. The circumstances couldn't be any worse. The timing was absolutely atrocious as well. But when had it not been? In hindsight, there had always been something standing between them. Neither Sunny nor Nephi's had any time to think about their feelings on the forgotten shore. Then they were separated for 2 long years. After Nephi's return, they only spent a month together before he left for Antarctica. And after Antarctica, he was forgotten by everyone, including her. They had only had a few fleeting moments to be together in peace, in the depths of the third nightmare. So, strangely enough, despite having known her for almost 10 years, this was the first time Sunny had enough maturity to not only know what he wanted, but also be able to express his feelings. So what if the timing was terrible, and there was a war approaching? If he decided to wait for a good moment to act on his desires, he would have had to wait forever. After talking some more, he showed Nephi's out and returned to the brilliant emporium while whistling an upbeat melody. For once he was inside, he was met by Aiko's chilly gaze. What are you so happy about? Sunny grinned and suppressed the desire to pinch her cheeks. Instead, he said happily, I just agreed to follow Lady Nephi's to war. The petite girl glared at him silently. There's going to be a war, Sunny nodded. Oh right, you didn't know. Yeah, there is. Aiko kept silent for a while, then let out a long sigh and sat down. And you're going with Nephi's to that war? He gave her a carefree shrug. It seems so. Aiko sighed again, then covered her face with both hands and groaned. Gods, not again. Why does this keep happening to me? No, really, why? Sunny looked at her guiltily, then walked over and patted the petite girl on the head. His voice sounded bright. Aiko, don't worry too much, it's going to be fine. Let me ask you something. When she looked up at him with teary eyes, he grinned and asked cheerfully, Have you heard about the wonderful world of war profiteering? Chapter 1837. Part of life. A few days later, Sunny dove into the cold waters of the Mirror Lake, while the full moon slowly climbed the lightless sky. It was the last full moon before the great war between the two domains set both worlds aflame, and therefore, the last chance he had to meet Cassie in the ruined stronghold of a dead demon. Infiltrating the true bastion unnoticed was still somewhat difficult, however. Sunny was tense for an entirely different reason. Rain, that girl is really committed to making my life overly exciting, isn't she? It was shortly before his sister expressed her determination to participate in the domain war on the side of Queen Song, which wasn't really a big surprise to Sunny, who knew Rain well enough to guess that she would not stay idle. She was too compassionate and not nearly jaded enough to let her neighbors be bullied without trying to do something about it, no matter how small her contribution would be in the grand scheme of things. So he wasn't that angry. In fact, he was happy to see that she still retained this kind of innocence. He was also a little proud to know that she had this kind of integrity, something that he had always lacked, and only barely found in Antarctica before losing it all over again. But still, what brother wanted to see his little sister put herself in danger? Honestly, Sunny wanted nothing more than to whisk her to the nameless temple and keep her under lock until everything was over. No. The nameless temple wasn't safe enough, considering what role it was supposed to play. Nowhere was really safe anymore, and nothing would be really over for a long while. However, the main reason Sunny had not tried to dissuade Rain from joining the war was that she had to make her own choices, earn her own triumphs, and suffer from her own mistakes in order to learn and grow. No matter how much he worried about her safety, he would never want to become someone who stifled her growth with overbearing care instead of aiding it. That would only be a disservice, especially for someone as bright and dauntless as Rain was. Plus, so what if she was going to war? It would be a little tricky, without a doubt, but Sunny was quite confident in his ability to keep her alive even in the middle of a battlefield. Who was there among the champions of song and valor whom he couldn't handle? Well, all right, there were the sovereigns, but he could at least run away from them safely. So this war could very well become a harsh but indispensable opportunity for her to mature and grow stronger both in terms of ability and mentality. It was the latter part that Sunny was worried about. Not because he thought that Rain couldn't handle it, but because he knew that she would be left with invisible scars even if she did. Scars were a part of life as well, though. They were a part of growth. I don't know. In any case, there was nothing he could do about it now. So Sunny tried to forget his worries and concentrate on the task at hand. Cassie was waiting for him near the collapsed tower, her beautiful hair glistening in moonlight like pale gold. She was in one piece and seemingly alive. There were no visible bruises anywhere either. So Sunny felt a little less guilty about exposing her to Neff's wrath. I'll make it up to her later somehow. Rising from the water, he climbed onto the remains of the fallen tower. Hey, Cassie, Cassie smiled faintly. Hey, Sunny. It was still strange and heartwarming to hear someone call him by his name. Sunny enjoyed the feeling and looked at the crumbling walls of the ruined fortress. They seemed even more deserted than before. He raised an eyebrow. I don't see any knights on the walls. She nodded. There was no call for the vassals to assemble their armies yet, but the royal clan has already started to move its forces. Most of the knights and paladins are heading north. Awakened soldiers, too. It is hard to notice on the streets of the false bastion, but here their absence can be felt. Cassie hesitated for a few moments. The king is still here, though, so we need to be careful. He offered her his hand without wasting any time, then pulled them both into the mirror maze. Once they were in the familiar stone chamber, Sunny let go of Cassie's hand, summoned the shadow lantern, and said, I am glad that you are okay, and I'm sorry for putting you in a difficult situation. Well, I am sure that Nephis was her usual composed and restrained self, but still, the two of you must have had a heated conversation. Cassie faced him, and for a moment there was a strange expression on her face. Oh yes, indeed. She was her usual composed self. With that, she turned to the door and smiled. It's all right. I was actually glad to see her a little flustered. You did a fine job, by the way, telling her. Now that this obstacle is behind the two of you, the future seems a little brighter. Sunny sighed quietly. I hope so too. But to tell you the truth, I am as worried and apprehensive about it as I am relieved and elated. There are things I simply can't tell her after all. Can we really be together when we can't even be honest with each other? I am worried, Cassie smiled. Of course you can. Honesty is important, but it is also overrated. If people were entirely honest with each other, there would have been no romance in the world. What do you think a relationship is? At the start, everyone hides their true selves and only shows the other person their best side. And by the time two people come together, even if some details remain hidden, the important truths shine through. I think you showed her the important truth splendidly. Sunny stared at her silently for a while. It was strange, but after hearing her words, he suddenly felt a lot better. Sensing his reaction, Cassie raised an eyebrow. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing, really. It's just that, how are you so good at giving advice? You've never been in a relationship before yourself. It's weird." Cassie seemed mortified. Who said that I've never?" Sunny gave her a dubious look. "Please." The young woman remained motionless for a few moments, then slowly turned her back to him. Her voice sounded a little irked. "Unbelievable. That's 2 times in a week now." Chapter 1838 Palace of Imagination. Soon, a tide of shadows swallowed the mirror maze, and they continued their meticulous exploration. Sunny did not really hope to reveal the secret of the maze tonight. In fact, by now, he was starting to suspect that he would never be able to reach its heart that way, simply because what he was doing was inherently wrong. It was impossible to reach the tomb of Ariel no matter how long one marched across the nightmare desert, at least during the day. He believed that the only way to approach the Great Pyramid was to brave the Sea of Dunes at night, when it was the most dangerous. Similarly, there must have been some trick to traversing the labyrinth of mirrors. Perhaps by drowning the maze in shadows and neutering its mirror walls, Sunny was preventing himself from making any progress. He sighed. Behind him, Cassie hesitated for a few moments and then said quietly, "That girl in the song domain." Sunny glanced back with a neutral expression, knowing what she wanted but couldn't ask. "She is someone precious." The blind seer remained silent for a while. Eventually, she smiled and said with a hint of wonder in her voice, "It is funny, isn't it? The entire world is frozen in fear and anticipation of a great war that will shape history. And yet, no one is aware that something no less important has happened in the desolate wilderness of the dream realm, witnessed by nobody except for a young legacy girl, you and me, a human of the waking world awakening without being cursed by the nightmare spell. Your achievement is remarkable." A pale smile appeared on Sunny's lips as well. "Funny. It is a bit funny, I guess." He remained silent for a few moments and then added, "However, this achievement can only become important in the future. She can only make a difference in the future. Right now, it is up to people like us, you, me, and Nephi's to make sure that there is a future for people like her to make history." His smile turned a little bittersweet. "In fact, if there is a future, I hope that what we did becomes all but forgotten, and only what they did is remembered." "Such a wish is quite ironic coming from someone like me, isn't it?" Cassie chuckled. "It is, especially when expressed to someone like me. Although I must say I doubt that there is someone like you or me out there, or will ever be again." Sunny couldn't help but laugh quietly. "Gods, I hope not. It would be quite sad if someone in the future had to suffer like him and was forced to do the same terrible things that he had done or was yet to do still." Just then they made another turn and froze. His eyes widened. "I'll be damned." Sunny had not expected to discover anything in the mirror maze tonight, but unexpectedly he did. Out there in front of them, the narrow corridor opened into a vast hall. The mirror walls that had been pressing down on them expanded, disappearing into the distance. The floor of the underground chamber was sloping downward like a bowl, and the ceiling was out of sight. The spherical hall was so vast that Sunny could not see the other end of it. In fact, he couldn't see anything, as if something was obscuring his vision. His shadow sense was similarly suppressed. All he could feel was that the hall was enormous, ancient, and dangerous. Sunny's instincts were screaming that he needed to retreat. This sense of dire danger reminded him of the worst horrors he had experienced in his life. Then, there was a sound in the darkness. Chilled to the bone, Sunny looked down and felt something that did not make any sense, and yet filled him with a sense of terror. A wave of cold water rolled over the floor and licked his boots, pieces of ice drifting in the foam, then receded, as if he was standing on the shore of a freezing ocean. Then there was another sound, the rustle of countless leaves and the creaking of enormous branches. Wisps of mist drifted in the darkness, brushing against his skin like cold tendrils. The ghastly smell of the outskirts assaulted his nose. Before anything happened, Sonny grabbed Cassie and pulled her back into the corridor. Then, feeling that it was not enough, he stepped through the shadows and brought them back to the stone chamber. Letting go of the blind seer, he leaned on the wall heavily. His vision returned. Both of them were deathly pale and trembling. What the hell was that? Cassie's voice was subdued. Sonny forced himself to calm down and let out a stifled laugh. It wasn't easy to scare two saints, and yet here they were. The demon of imagination, damn. Cassie raised her eyebrow. What do you mean? Sonny slowly straightened his back and brushed his hair back. This castle was created by the demon of imagination once, wasn't it? So there have to be traces of her power left here. The mirrors are one such relic. The hall we found, I think it is another. The blind seer frowned. The icy water, the rustle of countless leaves, the mist, what do they have to do with the demon of imagination? Sonny slowly shook his head. Nothing, but... When we entered the hall, I felt a sense of danger and couldn't help but remember some of the most harrowing encounters of my life. And so, he hesitated for a few moments, struggling to believe in the theory that had formed in his mind. Eventually, though, Sonny finished his thought in a low tone. And so the hall made them real. Cassie's face paled. You mean to say that that place can make what we fear into reality? Sonny lingered for a while, then shook his head again. No. If I am right, then it is not what we fear. He shivered and added in a somber tone, it's what we imagine. Come to think of it, he must have gone blind there because of Cassie. Damn demons. Why did every one of them have to be scarier than the next? Cassie seemed a little shocked by his suggestion too. She hesitated for a while, then asked in a small voice, Then do you want to go try again? There is still time before dawn. Sonny laughed. Are you crazy? Just think about what is hidden there in our heads. Let's not even mention that one of us might accidentally think about having their limbs severed or skin peeled off. Can you control your thoughts completely? What if you imagine that cursed tyrant condemnation? What if you think about the forgotten God? He took a deep breath. I knew that there would be some kind of challenge at the heart of the mirror maze, but this is beyond what I have imagined. Pun intended. Conquering that hall is a lethal task even for us. No, especially for us, because we have seen too much and remember too much. It definitely wasn't something that could be accomplished in a day. If he wanted to reach the heart of the Hall of Imagination, he would need to prepare thoroughly. Sadly, there was no time. Sonny looked at the door of the stone chamber with regret and then sighed. It doesn't matter. I had a small hope of finding what I seek here before the war, but I can find it after we win, too. By then there will be no King of Swords and no clan valor. I won't need to hide in the darkness and come here only once a month, so I will return to this eerie place then. With that, Sonny offered Cassie his hand and forced out a smile. Let's leave for now. There is a lot I have to do in these next few days. It was true, because these would be the last days of peace. Chapter 1839, Last Days of Peace. Pale sunshine poured through the open window, and a gentle breeze made the curtains flutter. Sonny opened his eyes slowly, laying comfortably in his opulent bed. The subtle sounds of the city waking up washed over him, bright and lively on this peaceful morning. He yawned, then slowly got up. Today was like any other day in Bastion. There were some changes about the mood on the streets of the young city as of late, but mostly it was the same. The brilliant emporium was also the same except for one detail. There was a hand-drawn sign standing in front of the entrance. It had been there for the past few days, attracting plenty of attention. The sign said, "Closing soon, temporarily, farewell discounts for everyone. Best waffles in 2 worlds." As a result, Sonny had earned quite a lot of coins in the last day or two. The brilliant emporium seemed to have gathered a loyal audience, and the regulars were both sad to see it temporarily close doors and in a hurry to visit it one last time. But today was the last day. So Sonny wanted to make it perfect. Reaching the kitchen, he was surprised to see that Aiko was already there. The petite girl usually liked to sleep a lot. If it wasn't for the job, she would have lazed around in bed until noon. But today, she was there before Sonny. He looked at her in surprise. "I'm not seeing things, am I?" she grinned. "Of course not, boss. What are you talking about? I have always been dependable, punctual, and diligent." Sonny looked at her with doubt. "Dependable, punctual, and diligent. Do you even know what these words mean?" Aiko nodded energetically. "Of course, boss." He stared at her some more, then sighed. "Well, whatever. Start preparing the ingredients." The petite girl made a fist and floated up a little. "Yes, boss. I love you, boss." He shuddered. Aiko had been like that after realizing how profitable a war could be to an establishment dealing with memories. Her eyes had not stopped sparkling since. Sonny could practically see all kinds of nefarious schemes forming in her twisted little head. At least someone is happy. He manifested an avatar and went about welcoming the first customers. A few familiar faces visited the brilliant emporium that day. Early in the morning, he guided Bate to her usual table and brewed her some coffee. The dark circles under the young woman's eyes were even more pronounced than usual, and she seemed to be partially asleep. Sonny was a little touched that she made time to visit the brilliant emporium on its closing day despite that. "Here's your coffee, Miss Bate. Thank you for coming to say goodbye." She stared at him tiredly, then blinked a couple of times. "Huh, goodbye?" Sonny hesitated for a moment. "Yes, we are closing today temporarily." Bate frowned. "Oh, really? I didn't know." "I haven't left the lab in a week." "No, wait, what day is it today?" "In 10 days. Sonny looked at her silently, not knowing what to say. His pleasant smile froze a little. She sighed. "Well, it's a shame. I really grew to like this place. Good luck to you, Master Sunless, in whatever it is that you are going to do next." His smile widened a little. "Good luck to you as well, Miss Bate. I really hope that you succeed, but please take care of yourself. Your life is precious, too." She sipped her coffee and smiled with a hint of bittersweet sadness in her eyes. "I know. After all, there was someone who paid a great price to save it, so I have to live well." Shortly after, Sonny served teacher Julius breakfast and tea. The old man seemed strangely down, looking in the window with a distracted look. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then asked politely, "Is something bothering you?" "Awakened Julius." The old man perked up a little. "Ah, Master Sunless, it's nothing much. I'm just feeling old these days. I was born before there was even such a thing as the nightmare spell, you know. A youngster like you might not understand." He looked in the window and sighed. "The world keeps changing and old fossils like me can't keep up. Maybe it's time for me to retire." Sonny sat down across from him and chuckled. "What are you talking about?" Awakened Julius. "You of all people must not retire." Teacher Julius raised an eyebrow. "Oh, why, right. You probably don't know, but my course has never been very popular. I am usually lucky to get 1 or 2 students to attend. They are always the best students at the academy, of course, but still. It's a bit." Sonny shook his head. "It is because the world is changing that you must never retire. Think about it. Wilderness survival might not have been very in demand before, but it was only useful to a handful of awakened before as well." He gestured to the quiet street outside. "Now there are many more awakened out there. There are mundane people living in the dream realm, too. There are roads being built between new cities and trade routes being established. We are not just surviving in the wilderness anymore, we are trying to conquer it. So experts like you will become more precious than gold very soon." Teacher Julius stared at him with a strange expression for a while. Then his eyes glistened. "You think so?" Sonny nodded. "Of course." The old man was suddenly full of energy and smiled. "No, but you are right. The development of civilization is like a conquest of the wilds. Now that civilization is developing in the dream realm, youngsters like you will need someone with a bit of sense to guide them. I might not have a lot of sense, but I do know a thing or two about the dream realm. Let's see. I just need to change my approach a little." It was the same infectious enthusiasm Sonny was familiar with. Smiling, he quietly left teacher Julius to contemplate and left to serve other customers. At some point, Kim and Luster entered the dining hall. They seemed a little disheartened to see the brilliant emporium closing its doors. Luster shook Sonny's hand and gripped his shoulder with a strangely emotional look on his face. "I think I know why you have no choice but to do it, Master Sunless. Those damned rumors." The young man's eyes were almost glistening with tears. "But for whatever it is worth, I want you to know that, for me, and many others like me, you are a hero. A true hero, Princess Nephis. Damn, I admire you so much, Master Sunless. Please teach me your ways." Kim silently grabbed him by the collar, pulled him back, and gave Sonny an apologetic look. "Please ignore my idiot husband, Master Sunless." Luster looked at her, hid a smile, and grumbled. "No, I'm just saying. Can't I admire a virtuoso? It's purely academic interest." Sonny coughed, then guided them to a table. As they were sitting down, Luster looked around and asked in confusion, "By the way, Kimmy, where's Quentin?" She shrugged. "He was walking bait home, so it will probably be just us two today." Feeling something stir a little in his heart, Sonny smiled with genuine mirth and walked away to help prepare their food. He put extra effort to make sure that these two enjoyed an unforgettable meal. Later, Sonny heard soft whimpers coming from outside. Opening the door, he saw a peculiar scene. Aiko, who had left some time ago to run an errand, was floating in the air with a panicked expression. Little Ling was hugging her leg tightly, hanging on it like a monkey. Huge tears were falling from the little boy's eyes. "No, Auntie Aiko can't leave. Ling Ling won't let her go." Giving up in despair, Aiko stopped trying to float away and awkwardly patted him on the head. It's all right, puppy. I'm not leaving yet. But if you don't let go, I won't be able to walk. Ouch, my leg." Ling's dad finally managed to pull his son off her, hugged him tightly, and gave Sonny a helpless smile. "Sorry about that." Nevertheless, little Ling's tears were dried up soon. The boy was fully preoccupied with a bowl of ice cream, but he still insisted on holding Aiko's hand and refusing to let her out of his sight even for a minute. His father sighed. "Are you really leaving?" Sonny glanced at him, then smiled. "Yes, well, for a while. Hopefully, we'll be back one day." Little Ling's dad looked a little sad. The two of them were on friendly terms and spent quite a bit of time together due to the cooperation between the Beast Farm and the brilliant Emporium. Sonny felt a bit touched to know that he would be missed. "In the meantime, please take care of your family. Most people do not know, but you should be aware that we are in for some tough times." His former soldier nodded somberly. "I know. I will. You take care too, Master Sunless." Sonny gripped his shoulder for a moment, then went over to the table and patted Ling Ling on the head. The little boy looked up at him and smiled shyly. "Uncle." Sonny smiled as well. "I'm sorry, Ling Ling. This is the last bowl of ice cream I'll be able to treat you with for a while." Little Ling's tiny face instantly turned downcast. His doleful expression was both incredibly cute and comical. I see," Sonny sighed. "But when I return, I'll give you 3 entire bowls of ice cream, and a huge mug of hot chocolate, and even a cake." The little boy's eyes widened. "Really?" Sonny nodded. "Of course, in the meantime, take care of your mom. She looks tough, but she is actually a huge softie. You need to treat her well." Little Ling grinned. "Ling Ling treats mommy the best." Then he giggled and added with excitement, "Mommy is huge, Uncle said so." Sonny's expression faltered. "No, wait a second, don't say that. Most importantly, don't say that I said that. Not huge, a huge softie. Repeat after me, Ling Ling. Softie, softie." But the little boy was already distracted by something else and refused to listen. Looking at him, Sonny paled a little, and then sighed. "Maybe it's a good thing that I am leaving Bastion. I need to get the hell out of here before Effie hears that." There were more customers after that as well. A lot of female customers, in particular, were sighing as they threw secretive glances at Sonny. He was even worried that there was something wrong with his cooking today, but Aiko simply rolled her eyes and assured him that everything was fine. Sunny could only carry on in bewilderment. I guess people get really attached to their favorite cafes. But then, eventually, it was time to close the doors. It was already dark by then, and the young moon was slowly rising in the sky. Sunny remained on the porch for a while, looking at the city and breathing deeply. He had grown used to the scent of Bastion in the past year without even knowing that he had. In hindsight, it had been a wonderful year, but now it was time to leave. He sighed. I'm going to miss this. With that, Sunny turned around, walked inside, and closed the door behind him. Chapter 1840 bathed in starlight high in the sky above Bastion. A beautiful island was hovering, shrouded in the veil of clouds. Illuminated by pale starlight, a white pagoda stood upon it, piercing the heaven. Nobody noticed when the flying island started to move. Not only because it was dark, and most of the citizens were already asleep, but also because a perfect illusory copy of the island remained in its place when it did. Due to the attempted assassination of Changing Star, Clan Valor gained leverage over the government. They used some of that leverage to summon Saint Thane, a government transcendent who held power over dreams and illusions, to Bastion. His task was to hide the fact that the Ivory Island had left the sky above Mirror Lake. In truth, it was heading for Godgrave. Before that, however, the flying island made a stop. Descending from the great heights, it reached the shore of the lake and landed on the water. A tall wave rose, flooding a few streets that were closest to the shore for a few moments. Among them was a quiet street where a cozy brick cottage stood. At that moment, something bizarre happened. The cottage stirred and then rose, revealing countless metal legs that were attached to its bottom. Turning around, it trotted to the shore and then nonchalantly dove into the water. The cottage swam surprisingly well for a brick building. Covering the distance to the island swiftly, it climbed ashore, shook energetically, and then looked around in confusion. It was as if it was unsure where to plop down. Eventually, the bizarre creature simply lowered itself to the ground where it stood. As soon as it did, the island slowly rose from the water and moved north. Soaring into the sky to hide behind the clouds, it flew above the sleeping city and left it behind. At that time, the door of the cottage opened, and a young man with alabaster skin and raven-black hair walked out of it. Sunny stepped on the soft soil of the Ivory Island, inhaled deeply, and smiled. What a beautiful sight! Nephi's was standing a few steps away, looking at him calmly. She responded to his smile with one of her own. Ivory Island is indeed beautiful at night. Welcome. He looked at her silently for a while, then shook his head softly. I wasn't talking about the island. Neff's eyes widened a little. Oh, she hesitated for a few moments, then looked away in embarrassment and gestured to the dark expanse of emerald grass. Would you like to take a walk? Sunny nodded with a smile. Sure. He offered her his arm, and when she took it, asked quietly, Once we reach Godgrave, where do you want to go? I'm afraid there are no beaches there, but I can still prepare a picnic. Nephi's chuckled. We won't reach it for a while, there's plenty of time to decide. They walked silently side by side, eventually reaching the edge of the island. Below, a sea of clouds was shining with reflected starlight. Above, a myriad of stars was burning in the distant sky. Neff's eyes were like two radiant stars as well, but much more beautiful. She studied the night sky for a while, then sighed. I find myself in doubt now that we are leaving for war. It happens sometimes, albeit rarely, and I can't really reveal that side of myself to anyone because my strength is their strength. But I am afraid sometimes, too. Can we really win? Can we really defeat the sovereigns? Even if we do, what then? A fragile smile appeared on her lips. Of course, I always banish these doubts since I can't afford them. You just caught me before I could steel myself tonight. Sunny looked at her silently for a while. Eventually, he smiled. Of course we can win. Of course we will defeat the sovereigns and everything that comes after them. Nephi's faced him, her ivory face bathed in starlight. Why are you so sure? Sunny chuckled. When he spoke, his voice was calm and confident. Because that is our will. Who dares to stop us? She was standing so close that he could hear her heartbeat and his own. The stars were shining in the lightless sky, illuminating the world with soft radiance. In that radiance, her lips looked even softer. Only war awaited them ahead. Placing his hands on her shoulders, he gently pulled her in and leaned forward. His heart was beating like a caged beast. When their lips touched gently, it was as though the whole world was engulfed with heat. And Sonny wasn't satisfied with that gentle touch. He was hungry for more. Wrapping his hands around her, he pulled her closer until their bodies were pressed tightly against each other, with no space for anything except passion between them. Nephi slowly raised her hands and embraced him, as well, responding to his kiss. At the same time, their kiss grew more passionate, as if both had been starving for each other's lips for a long, long time, and intoxicated by the taste of her. Sonny finally felt complete. Somewhere else, a ruined fortress bathed in the light of a shattered moon. In the remnants of its main keep, a tall dais stood. There was no throne and no altar on the dais. Instead, there was an iron anvil and a man who stood in front of it, swinging a heavy hammer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a lean but mighty physique. Powerful muscles rolled under his glistening skin, and his sweat was evaporating in the unbearable heat of a crucible. His bare torso was painted in shades of vermilion by its angry light. The man had dark hair and a thick but dignified beard. The expression on his noble face was harsh and austere, and his gray eyes were as cold as tempered steel. There was a sword taking shape under his hammer on the iron anvil. Eventually, the man put the hammer aside and quenched the incandescent blade in water. The reflection on its surface convulsed when it was pierced by the sharp tip, and was then obscured by rising steam. A few moments later, the blacksmith pulled the sword out of the water and looked at it closely. Then the intensity of his gaze was replaced with contempt and disappointment. Gritting his teeth, the man tossed the beautiful blade aside. It fell from the dais and flew down. What waited below was a mountain of swords, each so masterfully crafted that many warriors would eagerly kill for the right to wield one. The newborn blade landed on the top of the mountain and joined its countless siblings, laying there, abandoned and forgotten. Far away, a vast hall cut in blue ice was drowning in darkness. In the center of the hall, a tall throne stood, illuminated by the ghostly light of dancing flames. A corpse of a breathtakingly beautiful woman was sitting on the throne, dressed in a regal red gown. Its hem spilled down the steps of the throne like a river of blood. The woman's chest was pierced by a sword, which pinned her to the back of the throne. Two dead youths stood on both sides of the throne, waiting in silence. Then the silence was broken. Pieces of ice fell to the floor and shattered as the dead woman's hands slowly rose. Her pale, long fingers wrapped themselves around the blade of the sword. Soon, there was the sound of metal breaking. In the next moment, the ice hall and the entire mountain encompassing it shuddered. And someplace else, a gaunt man was sitting in the dust, wearing a tattered spacesuit. The visor of his helmet was cracked, and the oxygen in the tank attached to his back had long run out. Nevertheless, the gaunt man was somehow still alive. He had been motionless for a while, but now he finally moved. Raising his head, he looked at a beautiful blue disk floating in the great darkness above him. His cracked lips twisted into a smile. How curious! That was what he wanted to say, but of course, no sound escaped from his lips since there was no air to transmit it. The man tried to sigh, but failed for the same reason. He shook his head in dejection and moved his lips again. If someone was there to read them, they would have read, "It's starting." The war